And we are recording. Ooh, welcome to Really Loved Guitars. And I'm going to do a close-up of this Squier Mustang, which has been, I think, a little bit upgraded-ified. And this is Michael's Bullet Mustang, Squier Bullet Mustang. And you see it's got two P90s, I don't know what brand they are, kind of have a bit of a Warman look to them. Two P90s, three-way switch pointing front and back, which is sort of kind of more familiar in a way. It has what looks like a tusk nut of sorts, but it's not functioning very well. In fact, it's functioning terribly. It's grabbing the strings like nobody's business. So this is a shorter scale beastie, and Michael's bought this from a seller and it's arrived here with me for a setup, and it's got some Vanson tuners on there, what look like Vanson tuners. I mean, they're kind of, what do they call them, white labeled, I suppose you might say, made generic, unbranded, and people call them their own names, and they're, you know, you buy them from those people because you got used to buying them from those people, which is very good. Yeah, so this is all in good condition. Very low action on this guitar. I was struck when I played it. It's got a nice, people complain about the, people complain about Squiers and, you know, especially the bullets, they call them, I think the necks are crappy. You know, you've got a nice rosewood finish, or it may not even be rosewood these days, but, you know, it's a nice looking fingerboard, as you can see. Unlike a lot of the other Chinese, this is Indonesia, right? Yeah, unlike a lot of Chinese necks, this is at least, you know, a good looking thing. It's got some glue there. Can you see that? Anyway, so, but yeah, I had a little go on this, and it's all as you'd expect, except it won't stay in tune. So we're going to put some decent string trees on. We talked about different colours. I've got black and white, but looking at the colour scheme on this, I think black's going to look better on this guitar with all of this. So I'm going to set that up tonight, and you might be able to see that I'm wearing a scarf because it's pretty brassic in here. We're 0 degrees outside, so that's technically freezing, isn't it? So it's cold in here, and it's evening time, so it's kind of colder anyway. Stop that. Yeah, so I'm going to set this up tonight, and it's got 9s on it, which are too bendy for the short scale really, so I'm going to put some 10s on as well. So the main thing is going to be removing and fitting an adjustable nut. This looks like it's the factory nut, which is kind of good for Squier because it's not just a plastic nut. They've at least gone to that trouble, but they've cut it really badly. With something like this, you could just cut it right and be done with it, but I'm going to fit an adjustable one, providing, let's just do a couple of quick measurements, providing wrong thing, providing it's the sort of reasonably standard front to back distance, 350. That's perhaps a little unusual. Okay, that's much wider than that one. Let's see what it looks like compared to my blanks. Sorry about this, arms in the way. We might be struggling for the width on this, which is not something you would sort of normally expect really. 350, maybe it's got a little edge on it. Just had an unpleasant experience, and it's got a little lip on here which we can do without. Yeah, I've got some emails coming in about this. So I've got 2 guitars here with me tonight that have come in from people, vendors for customers who haven't seen the guitars, and the idea is that I set them up. Okay, this is 340, so this is a slightly non-standard width. The problem with that is the only way, if this really is 340 and there's no argument on this, and there's no 350, then we could be just on a bit of hiding to nothing. I've got an adjustable one here I made up, and that's 350, that's 373, but I don't really want to be fitting that, because you know what, that's just a fraction. The string's in the right place, but I will see. Yeah, the problem is 340 is still a fraction loose. But this one's quite tall, it's quite a deep slot. Anyway, just to fill in the blanks of what I was saying a minute ago. Second guitar I've got in from 4 people from sellers, and I'm just going to check my email on this one. Okay, nothing, no email in on this. I've just had to contact, there's one down there which I've just got in for Pete, which has come from an Italian seller. I'm absolutely gobsmacked. If you'd have seen the box, there was a box, and a cheap soft box with, I had a photograph, I could probably insert it in this video as well if I could find it, but I've got a photograph of it. Imagine 5 little broken up pieces of polystyrene loose inside this box. This is an £8 plus guitar. It's a 7-string Matt Heafy Epiphone. Paid 800 bucks, 800 euros for this, and the guy put it in a soft cardboard guitar box with about 5 or 6 pieces of broken up loose polystyrene, put some tape around it and sent it, and lo and behold, it's cracked. It's been stood on, the selector button's broken, and the neck joint has been stressed so that the seal is broken, and there's a huge ding on the side where it's been banged against something inside the case because there's no protection at all. And this brings me to the second experience recently, actually second in a couple of months, of guitars that people have bought from a seller, had delivered to me, and I've had to break bad news to them about the condition. This is a third one, only this isn't in bad condition. There are a couple of tiny little things. There's a burn on the pick guard here, and there's a loose strap button. But apart from that, everything on here, and a little bit of glue on the fingerboard, but apart from that, everything about this is thankfully good. But in 2 of the previous ones, there's a horrible thing that happens when I have to break bad news, especially to Pete, who's paid 800, well, that's not true. He spent 800 euros on this guitar, plus a couple of £100 nearly, well, a couple of €100 in duty to get it in, thanks to our government taking VAT on private eBay sales, which they never had access to before because they weren't charged with VAT on them. But now the government adds that, and you have to pay it to UPS before you even get your precious private eBay sale. Thanks, Gov. Thanks, Brexit. No, I'm not being political. I'm just saying that's what it's cost this buyer. So for about £1,000 plus the original postage from Italy, I have to now tell him that it's damaged, seriously damaged. And at best, he's going to get a partial refund, right? At worst, he can call on PayPal and say, not as described, damaged, and we've got pictures and testimony of how bad the packaging is, right? And there's no real argument about how bad it is. But even at best, getting this back to the seller will be an absolute nightmare under these Brexit conditions. The hassle this has taken to get here would cost, you know, well, we could send it back, but the guy would probably just write it off. You know, it'd probably end up being burnt in a skip or something. So it's a horrible position. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, I hate being in this position. It's such a downer when it's supposed to be a happy occasion. Luckily, one of the guitars that came to me from another seller for Pete, I've done and made the nice, beautiful 6-string extra wide, and he's got it and he can play it. It's not a total disaster in, you know, his memories of real love guitars isn't this disastrous piece of packaging that his idiot did overseas. But it's a huge risk. And I hate the fact that no matter how little it has to do with me, it totally blights the experience that somebody has of me working for them, with them on a project. And I hate that. It's unfair. I mean, it's unfair. It's the way it is. But, you know, so a previous one was a guy, local guy to here, brought me a Les Paul that he bought just recently, and he hadn't had time to really look at it that closely. Now, that didn't come to me from the seller, but you know, he brought me the guitar, you know, handed it over in Morrison's car park, you know, in the dark. The customer who owned it brought it to me and said, right, great, thanks, go and set it up. And I got it in the light and had a look at it and discovered kind of lacquer cracks down the edge of the fingerboard and stuff. And again, that totally soured my setting the guitar up for him, even though I did the best, you know, the very best work I can do, as I always do. You know, the whole thing is blighted by, oh, it's that guitar that I didn't notice that had cracks down the neck, and the guy didn't tell me when he sold it to me. So that's what, you know, you people who sell guitars and don't declare faults, okay? And you people who sell guitars and then package them in the most stupid ways, that's what you cause. You cause a whole bad feeling between good, decent people who paid loads of money for something, and then the people who are working for them at the other end to help to try and make them have a good time, like they should have for their €1,000 worth of spend. So yeah, if I'm pissed off with that, it's because I am. Now, thankfully, this is a good case, you know, where the seller has, there's a couple of little surface dings and blemishes. Now, you know, again, do I know that the seller has told Michael about these little blemishes? For example, there's a little ding in there, which I'm going to take a picture of because I can't afford to run the risk of, you know, and that's the situation it puts me in, is that people, you know, I have to then become double insuranced. Oh God, I can't even get my number right. I can't even use my thumbprint. I can't, you know, I have to start thinking insurance policies. There's finish marks on here. It's really funny, like a blob of excess finish, but hey. Yeah, so there's little marks that I now have to go and make sure I take a picture of in order to, you know, that we can be sure that this is a known quantity, and that it's not considered to be something I did. I shouldn't have to behave like that. It should be clear that, you know, if the seller's honest, we should know what's what. Now, I'm not saying, put it on video. I'm not saying the seller in this case isn't honest, but I have to sort of get into ultra, you know, arse covering mode, and I hate that. You know, it's supposed to be, you know, a luxury, enjoyable purchase that's all about feeling good with your new favourite guitar. Okay, so there's a little blemish, and there's one on the scratch plate as well, which I'll capture as well, so we know what's what. That looks like a soldering iron's being touched against it gently. All right, so apart from that, nothing wrong with this. So I'm going to set it up, and yeah, I'll try not to carry on my grumble, but you know, I hope you can sympathise with the situation. I hate being the one to break bad news to people, but you have to break the news. That's all there is to it. Okay, so let's get stuck into this. We've only got this camera angle now. I've kind of retired the Sony. This is running at 24 frames per second with 24, yeah, which somehow stops the flicker. This is running at 30, which doesn't. So I can't really even use that as a second one, only for close-ups really. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a full setup on this, make sure, see what we've got in the way of any uneven frets. It's pretty good, but I think there was a bit of bend choking, and see what I can do with this here nut. It's an unusual thickness. I'm a bit surprised at that. My slight concern is with this very low action anyway, I'm not sure we've actually got much room, even if I kept the nut in place and just solved the tuning issues by bringing the slots down a little bit, which I'm pretty certain I can do. Well, I could do, and you can get a nice playing or a nice stable tuning out of it. But I'm kind of nervous about taking the nut out. I know that Michael wanted the adjustable nut scenario in here. But blimey, I've got no cutting room in this. This is already so low. I mean, there's only one option with something like this. I could widen the slots, for example, which is a help, and it's possible to widen them in such a way that we don't reduce the playing action any further. But you know what, I think this does need to be, probably does need to be replaced. You know, I do often go on the "it ain't broke, don't fix it" principle, but in this case, yeah, we're talking about, it's almost exactly the same size, so I think we can replace it. It's barely, you know, it's 0.05 difference. I think we'll be all right to replace it. But it won't be, this one I had here left over from another thing which I didn't use it for. That isn't wide enough this way, so I'm going to need to do this one from scratch, but that's absolutely fine. It doesn't take too long to drill and tap the things. So I'll kind of aim at doing that first. But what I want to know about this guitar is we've got sharp fret ends, so we need to soften those up a bit. So it has got really, really low action to begin with. Let's have a listen, see if we have any choke outs. Again, this camera is about as good a position as I can get. My hands are cold. Right, it's at this point it's got a little bit of fret slap and a little bit of high fret somewhere up here, but it's not bad. And we're choking out there and there. So it's that one. That's why I remember it. So it's the one joining the body, which is quite a common sort of state of affairs. Let's put a little bit of tape on there. So the nice thing about identifying a very particular spot where the guitar struggles to play on the bends is that we can see, the benefit is we can see when I come to fret level it, you can see and hear that clear up. It's a very direct and tangible improvement. Now this, I can tell straight away from this guitar, but it's got a little bit of fret slap. There's not quite enough room for the strings to move at this setting, and I seem to, I checked the relief the other night, and it's very, very little. But I'm not going to change it just yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work at it, go at it with the height, the setting that's on there. Because I've got a suspicion that this neck can take it. I've got a good feeling about it. But straight off, we're going to need to take care of the nut. It was just badly, I mean, it is badly cut, there's no doubt about it. This thing was totally refusing to stay in tune. Now, like I said, it's completely feasible to replace, sorry, to cut the nut. You know, given the fact it's made of tusk or new bone anyway. Some scratches up here which are interesting. I don't know if that's factory. It looks like the kind of scratches when somebody's refinished the headstock but not sanded it out with fine enough sanding. But I don't think that's the case here because nobody's put any custom stickers or decals on, so I doubt the previous owner would have done that. So it looks like it's probably just a factory detail. I mean, you know, these are pretty inexpensive little things, really. Yes, what was I saying? I've lost my thread now. Too cold to think. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to, yeah, I tend to work to the if it ain't broke, don't fix it thing, and although that's made of tusk or new bone, and it should be good, and if it were taller, if the first fret actions on this were higher to begin with, then I would potentially just work it down and keep the nut in, because it's got a good little fitting joint and everything, and you know, anytime you replace the nut there is a risk of kind of pulling out little bits of finish and little bits of the wood, rosewood on the fingerboard. You know, it's not a completely trouble-free process. But anyhow, the thing mitigating against this, doing that with this one, is that it's already, the first fret action is already cut slightly too low. So I actually don't have any kind of remedial work room to do. And they've cut it too low, and on the other, some of the other slots, it's binding and it's not good enough. So I could try and widen them out, but Michael wanted the adjustable tusk nut fitting anyway, so let's go with that. This has a fairly little amount of, which I think, no, I'm going to use these even though they're not the right gauge. It doesn't, for doing fret leveling, it doesn't have to be the right gauge. It'll work fine with a 1 gauge lower. Obviously, when we put the gauge on, we will probably need to re-look at the relief, and in fact it will probably add a little bit of relief. It'll bend a little bit more relief into the neck anyway. So I'm just going to pull these tight, or pull the springs just out of the way for the time being, so I can get to this nut. I'm just letting it feel. Yeah, it's quite nicely fitted and all of that. It's just a shame that it's too, it doesn't keep chewing very well. You never find the screwdrivers I want. They're always buried inside, down in the bottom of this thing, because they're so small. They fall right to the bottom naturally. That's probably most of them. Look at that Evo Gold frets. Isn't that beautiful stuff? I've got a whole, somewhere behind the guitar, I've got a whole guitar's worth of that stuff to use at some point soon. I'm kind of looking forward to that. Right, let me get the small hammer. Yeah, now see, I'm sitting here feeling the bad feeling of having brought bad news to Pete about the Matt Heafy Epiphone. I hate to have to do that. I just wish the seller hadn't put both of us in that position. Dopey thing to have done. There we go. Okay, out comes the original nut. Yeah, it's a good quality material, but glued in. Now this one fits in nicely. It is a little bit, there's no doubt about it, that slot is a little bit wider. I mean, there's an alternative we can do is, if we had to, we could probably boost this up a little bit and recut the slots and reshape it. But it's a bit annoying that it's larger than the standard. The slot is slightly larger than the standard slot. I've got a 3. I suppose the other thing we could do, you know, is we could turn this into the adjustable nut. That gives us a bit of room to amend the slots. That's the other alternative. This would then stand up. Yeah, how about we do that? That's probably the best bet. I don't want a loose nut at all. Let's have a look at doing that. We'll achieve the same outcome. In other words, we'll have a tusk material nut cleaned up, like I'm doing here. Just check both sides. A bit of a, let's check the end there, clean that up. Clean this end up. This is a sort of not fail-safe exactly. The problem is this is an unorthodox nut size, and that gives us a problem because either we create a brand new we have to get, I don't think I've got another blank I don't think I've got another blank large sized tusk. Yeah, a large blank tusk for a Les Paul style thing, and that we'd have to cut a new nut out of that from scratch, and we'd only actually end up with something almost exactly like this. So I think what I would prefer to do is to repurpose this, treat it exactly the same, tap it for the screws, and get it seated in here, and then we lift it up a little bit, and it allows me then to come down on the, these nut slots and tidy them up so that they are in keeping tune. Because I think the alternative would be kind of a load of pointless hard work making one from scratch, which will only end up being the same as this. So what I'm going to need to do now is I'm going to need to mark this for drilling. I mean, what I'm doing is I'm doing the adjustable bit, which I would have done with that one straight out of the packet. So it's the same material and it's the same process. The only difference is that this one I'll be cutting down the slots a little bit more to make sure that they don't grab the strings and put them out of tune, which is what they've been doing. Okay, so I need to make a starter dent on here. Sorry, this is not something you can see at any kind of detail. So there's my little starter mark. It's a very precise process of marking and drilling and tapping out the thread on here, but it's a good process. It works really well. Now I need to get my box of parts, so I have to go to the big drill thing over there. I could try and turn you around and point you. I'll do that in a second. We need to make a first impression. That's dead, I think. That's good. That's not sharp enough. I'll make a first impression with this. You probably won't see this bit. A second. I'm just going to put this in the drill, in the vise, I should say. And I'm going to keep pumping out heater because it's bloody cold in here. Just going to, sorry about this, long boring view. Just going to, basically positioning this nut in the vise so I can just start these little holes prior to taking it to the pillar drill and drilling through with my bit, and then I can tap the hole. I'll tap the hole and we'll go from there. Okay. I've actually done one of these before where I, instead of even using the drill, I just kind of hand drilled it literally with my fingertips, which was quite an interesting, slow, meditative process, but it worked perfectly well. what I'm doing is I'm just starting up the holes on the top of the nut here to get the drill bit to sit in or to locate in properly, so that it goes through at the right angle. Okay, this and this. Just put this in the drill first. It's very messy over here behind the scenes, so obviously I'll be ashamed for you to see what's going on here in a minute. It takes me forever to wind up. I just wish there was a, I keep thinking of making an electric drill or power bit out of one of these chuck keys, so I can just lift up the, what do we call it, the power screwdriver, and just turn it and lock this thing quicker, because this seems to take forever to get the chuck from large to small drills by hand. I need a piece of wood to block for this will probably do. Just to hold this up. Yeah, I keep thinking, I know, I'll make one of those, but it would involve a lot of cutting to begin with. Right, can I even switch this around without the whole thing falling to bits? Well, the truth is, the magic arm is what it is, and it's quite incredible, so I have no idea what you can see. Well, I forgot to bring the mirror. I was going to do a thing with the mirror. You must be able to see something. Yeah, you can see what I'm doing there, and the mess. So I'm going to basically drill my starter holes in here. And I'm not, because I've unplugged this. What was in here? That's still that. Oh yeah, the drill's unplugged. Filthy plug that thing is. Right. Run it. Getting it in so that the drill doesn't try and bend and straighten itself out. Tricky, but it's gone through the right place. Sort of wanted to wander off sideways. Right. Hello. Hello, boy. Let's see where I can go with this. I seem to be running out of adjustment. Okay, let's try that. Kind of sort of there. Right, so there. Oh, let me bring across the things I need. Adjustable nuts department, and there's a spring. So we have our compartment of adjustable nuts, and we have our thing. This is our telly and sprat style grub screws and miniature hex keys. So we'll have 2 of these or more, 2 of these and 1 of those. It's funny buying loads of little hex keys because they're not cheap as individual things. You can't buy a 100 pack of M2 hex keys or something like that. It's a shame, really. They're about £1.50 or something each, so you end up just got to pay the cost. Okay, so I'm tapping this through, which will give us thread. I used to try or have tried to do this a few times with bone, and it sort of works. The only problem with bone is it's vulnerable to splitting too easily. So I kind of gave up, and anyway I sort of committed to using tusk or new bone or whatever, you know, the PTFE rich variant is. Oops, here comes emails, I think, from unhappy people, probably. Okay, now I've got the second one drilled, tapped, and then out again. Now what I do is when I put the grub screws in, I poke them out the bottom just a little bit. Oh, first of all, sorry, I'll show you what I do. I'll tell you because you can't see from over there. Oh dear, here comes the bad news. I just told somebody their 800 quid guitar, 800 euro guitar is a bit of a mess. Okay, so I screw in the grub screws, and then I extend, first thing I do is I just screw them in. And then what I'm going to do next is, because they've got a little cone point end, I'm going to let them stick out the bottom with their little cone point screws. I'm going to put it in the slot, and I'm going to then gently line it up and tap down with the hammer to make an imprint where the screw sits, or where the screw will want to sit. Now this is standing up quite tall at the moment, so what we'll do is we'll do the following: tap there, and that gives me 2 marks. I can see the other one. I see the first one, but I can't see the second one very well. Should be able to do it. Let's line that back up again. Support this a bit better. Okay. Now what I will do with that is I will make a slight impression. I can see it right there. Next. There, I'll just make a bit of a deeper impression so I don't lose it. Okay, and then I get me something like a 3mm bit. They were all here, there they are. Got me a 3mm bit or something that fits in there, and at this point I'm going to just, I suppose you could call it drilling. I'm just spinning the bit by hand, so I'm making a little impression in the wood of the fingerboard. It's not a huge dip, it's just a small cavity, and the reason for that is to just catch these grub screws and stop them moving sideways, and it's only a tiny little impression, so it doesn't really make any difference to anything. Just helps locate this. So if I put this in now, the correct way round, I can, you know, it's locating in those little divots and they aren't going anywhere. Now what's great now is if I put the strings back on, because I've used the feet and they're a little bit up on their feet right now, what we'll find is it won't take much. In fact, let's take retract the feet, because what we find is it won't take much to bring this up to its correct height. It was a little bit low before, and then we can cut down with the file, the slot files, just to get it to the height we want it, but also to sort out the slots that we're binding. So we've got very loose strings at the moment, which isn't helping. So sorry about the long view. Still going to have to think of some other way of filming. It was quite cool to have the Sony camera up there, and I have to say I might continue with it, because looking at some of the footage that I did for my ebook content, which is soon to be released, what it did was it actually made a good cutaway to camera thing, which just, there were times where the picture's not great, you know, and the sound, well, I didn't have to use the sound, I could use continuous sound from there. So it may be that that's a better option than just having a single point of view. Okay, so now I've got the I've got the thingy there, and what I will do is I will now bring these up. Now this is sitting back down where it was, so it's a fraction too low. So what I do is I now bring this down until it bites into the wood. Oh, I forgot to do, damn, I forgot to do one more thing. Oh, idiot. Start again. I forgot to flatten the grub screws. That's the next bit. So I use the cone point grub screws to mark the spot in the slot. Then, before I refit it, I should have taken the nut, made the screws stick out the bottom very slightly, which I'm going to do now, and sand the bottoms down just slightly on a sanding block. So we just get them to stick out a tiny fraction, and this gives them a flat footprint, and it helps to make it much easier, or it doesn't dig into the wood so much, so it's a much better shape. My hands are cold tonight. Anyway, so that's what this little bit's for. So we get this flat bottom, and we just run down the metal, sand the metal off, and have a look underneath, and we can just poke them out a tiny bit more if we need to, just to finish off that leveling, flattening. Now it's kind of important to keep this upright so we don't go off on a slant. It's not too bad if you do go on a slant with the adjustable nut, of course, because once you are lifting the bottom of the nut off the slot, then obviously it doesn't really matter if it's a little bit kind of out of shape. It's not perfectly perpendicular, is what I'm trying to say, but for my peace of mind, I like it to be perpendicular. Anyway, so we put this back on, line up the strings, press it all down. Yeah, that's funny. It's funny that the Indonesian factory will make a nut that's slightly oversized, and for example, Tusk, who make a sort of standard, or Graphtec make a standard strap style. I'm not sure they make a wider one, so I'm not sure we would find a direct copy, and that becomes a pain because, you know, refitting or trying to fit something that's got a bit of lean in it is not such a good thing. It doesn't feel so good. Okay, so now we go back down to the bite point and we raise this up a little bit, and we go down to the bite point on the base side and we raise that up a little bit too. Now we barely lifted it up, but what we've done is we've lifted it up enough for me to now adjust the first fret action. So right now we're above 3.3. I'll go a little higher on this side. Okay. Have a feel. Okay, I'll put these under a bit more pressure. In fact, I'd better off have that in roughly in pitch. Approximately, right. So now I'm going to redo the nut slots, but kind of almost entirely, not entirely, but very much from the perspective of easing up this that stuff, friction that we had before. So I can see how dark and dirty these slots are, and it means they're pulling dirt off the strings, which is why it's kind of so grubby in there. Now what I'm doing is I'm cutting them in a way that makes more of a notch, and what I'll do is I'll reshape the nut afterwards so that we don't have to worry about the fact that it's got notches rather than straight walled things, slots. But there's quite a bit of adjustment now room left, so I can really make these work as 3 running slots down to the correct height that I want. And there's only, realistically, there's only a little bit of lift on this nut, which is fine. So that's what putting it on its legs has done. It's giving it a bit more adjustment room. What I can do is, when the time right, I can take the grub screws out. It's currently, it's feeling, the slot is even wide, slightly wider than this nut. So I think they've made a mistake in the factory, a slight mistake anyway, because you don't want this much room. You really don't. You want a better fit than this. Now I'm just using these nut files to round out the bottom of this slot, not to really cut down, just to make sure that the shape when I get down there is the right shape. I'm mostly using this file to do the hard work of lowering the gap. Right, there we are, on the mark. On the mark. Where's my brush? Brush. I had a brush here. It's there. Thank you. I say thank you. Okay. So that's the correct height. And now we'll put this one on. A bit more to do here. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring 0.3 up from the fret, so that we get the exact right, correct height, first fret action, but I get it with these wider slots that aren't going to grip the string. So they're going to make use of the tusk material and its lubricated advantages, but without gripping it, because if you're compressing a string in a tusk nut because the slot's too deep and too constrictive, it'll put friction back into it, and it will sort of counteract the positive properties of the tusk nut, which is certainly not what we want. So I'm looking to get down to the correct playing action. Like I say, then I'll reshape the whatchamacallit, the top of the nut afterwards, and I'll take out the grub screws, put the nut in flat, and use a sandpaper to just smooth it down, or take it down, so we don't have any excess material above the slots. So using the adjustability of it gives us back the room to clean out these slots and make sure that they work without friction. And that's the most important bit for keeping your guitar playing and staying in tune. Now, I won't charge for the new Tusk nut in this, obviously, because this is the original nut. So, you know, I have one spare which I can use on another guitar where the height is exactly, sorry, the width is exactly correct. The front to back width, I should say, because it's very specific. Okay, so we've got some notches now that are showing, it looks like notches, they look like shark's teeth at the moment, which is fine. People don't like that as a general look for their nut slots, and that's understandable. But what I'm interested in is making it so that it plays and stays in tune more than anything else. So I'm aiming to cut it in such a way that there's no chance of the slots gripping the strings, which it can't do if the slot itself is a notch, because it's constantly opening up away from the string in the middle. So that's the beauty of actually having a notch to begin with. The downside is it looks unprofessional to people who are just worried about what it looks like. So as a sort of nod to that, I then like to sand down the nut to remove the excess material, so you don't get a sense of the V shape of the notch. So again, you can see all the gunge that's built up in these slots from previous use. Just get rid of that if I can. Okay, that's about right. Check this one. Not far off. So I'm always cutting backwards to give a backward slope. That's pretty good. Okay, so we now have, out of tune, but nonetheless, a tunes perfectly, no dragging, no dead spots. Okay, that's great. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the grub screws down to the ground, take them out, which seems a weird thing to do, but we'll take them out for now. And now with the nut sitting on the deck, in the slot if you like, what I'll do now is I'll now sand down the excess material so we get a nice, thank you, spit it out, so we get a nice smooth backwards facing nut. I'll see what different grades of sandpaper we can use. Right, so you can't see this very well, but now I'm doing this and I'm able to kind of do it until I hit the strings, because I'm going to take these strings off and bin them. So I'm able to just keep going until I start scraping the strings. And when I get there, I'm pretty close to where I want to be. if I scrape the plain string too much, like that, you'll hear them protest and they'll possibly snap off, but it's okay. Okay, tidy up, have a look at it. It's nice and low, that's great. Now what we want to do is to put a lower grade, smaller grade of paper on. I'm trying to think, where's my, there's a smaller grade. So this is smoothing it out a lot more, round the corners off. And if you go further with sandpaper, we'd have a 400 grit next. To really smooth it off. So this is a, this is not a get out of jail exactly, but this is, a way of solving a problem that would otherwise be a big pain, really, having to either cut a custom nut from a large block of tusk, which requires, a full-size Les Paul tusk nut as a start point, and that's a bit, I don't know what the word would be, it's a bit, so it'll eat up a lot of material, yeah, wasteful I think is the word I'm looking for. Okay, let's just get this nice and flush with the strings. So we don't need any more above the strings than is already there, because everything above the strings is pointless. So that looks good. Now what we can do is take off, at this point, take off the strings altogether. No, I'm going to leave them on silly because I need them. I'm going to take them off for a minute so I can sand the nut a little bit smoother without worrying about the strings, and then put them back on for fret leveling, and then we'll be on our way from there. Okay, so there's my, come back, there's my nut cut to the right height. I can just gently smooth off any shaggy bits overhanging, put it back in here, and while it's in place, get this lighter grit onto it, smooth it out. And then take a 400 grit paper, which I've got some of here, excuse me, and a little block. Now this is 600. That's a 400, that's 1,000. That's 400. Let's put it around here. Okay, so there's my 400. Hold it in place. Yeah, it's a little bit fraction thinner than the actual slot, which is a weird thing to do. Come here. Stay. Then you can go 600 if you're feeling like it. And if you're feeling like it, you could go all the way to the realms of micro mesh if you wanted to, and kind of end up with a shiny thing. But actually that is beautifully smooth enough. So then I'll refined my thingamajigs. Now these may be a little taller than I'd like, in which case if they are, I'll install them and I will use a sanding block to take them down a little bit more. Now that's going to danger of cross threading that. Get it in properly, thank you. Actually, it's not too bad. It's only no good if it's standing miles high out of the hole. Come on, in you go. I have to attend to this phone messaging department in a second. Now, while I'm here, when I've got the strings off, let's mark up. Let's look at the phone. Let's look at the bad news. Oh. Okay. Right. Wednesday. No, that's wrong. It's impossible to find. Sorry, the photos didn't come through on the first email. Okay, he has got them. Okay, came early. No, right, no. Terrible. Got the pics. Got the pics. He's got the pics. You got any views? No. His question was, understandably, is it repairable? Really? A great big dent with all the lacquer cracked off around the sides of it. It's a refinish, you know. It's repairable in that sense. You can't do a spot repair on a great big dent knocked out of the side, the edge of a guitar, unfortunately. So I don't think it's certainly not an economical repair, you know, in the sense that it's, oh, well, you know, you can fill a bad ding with material, something like glue boost, which turns out to be pretty good for filling big dings. However, when you do fill it, you're still left with, you see the damage. It's impossible to, very difficult to fill it with paint, a mixture of paint and the glue boost. The glue boost sets as a clear glassy substance. And it can, but you still have to work for hours to get it to a glassy smooth finish with the surface of your guitar, but it can get there. But you have to actually polish all around it, sand all around it, so you have, the repair gets wider and wider, and then you eventually end up buffing the whole lot out or polishing the whole lot out. So it's a tricky, time-consuming thing, even to do that sort of repair, and that isn't a finish. You know, it isn't a cosmetic showroom type finish. You know, it'll be a smooth, like a frozen pothole, if you get what I mean, filled with water, but with yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. Okay, so having put this, I now put this back in and tune it up, and then we'll tweak the action as we get closer. I'm looking at marks on these strings, and I suspect that this guitar was played tuned up. I think it might have been, I don't know. Either that or I'm not getting the tuning right, because there's marks on the strings that suggest that they were positioned elsewhere on the frets We shall see. Okay, so now looking at the height, I need to come down a bit, don't need this much. And that's the beauty of the adjustable nut. You can bring it down and you can measure it if you want, or you can just bring it down until you think it's at the right place for how you want to play it. Sounds good to me. Okay, that's good. Happy with that. Right, so we've got a homemade adjustable nut in there, tusk. And now it's time to do the fret leveling. Tango advertising. Oh, I won't product place that there. I'll put it over here where it should be safe. Yeah, so now I'm going to do the fret leveling. Move a few things out of the way that I no longer need. Yes, that horrible feeling of both bringing bad news to someone and then having to help them clear up the mess, which isn't great. You know. And all because the guy didn't pack it properly. Okay. Right, these can go to the side for a minute. Right, you can go back up there where you belong. You can go on the edge of there. Right, fret leveling. I'm going to use, oh, no, it's too flat. I'll use this one. I'll use this one. I think I'm nearly ready to retire both of these for some fresh papers. Okay, so now the time to do the miracle fret leveling. You know, I've been doing this now for several years. Who would have believed it? Several years, and oh, mustn't forget that little bit of glue, take that off there. And with this method of fret leveling, each time I do it, I get a new sort of buzz out of it, because I find something else or I find a way in which it tells me what's going on. So it's a really elegant little system. And I just recently, I kind of learned something else about it that I wasn't really quite sure of. And that was, so now either we've got some low frets in the middle or that isn't calibrated properly. So first warning is go back and calibrate it. Now when I say it's not calibrated properly, it's not like there's some big problem. I mean, first of all, we've only got 400 grit on here at that. And so it's cut very, very slowly. But the second thing is, if anything, the bar's slightly too flat. But you know what, it isn't. So we actually have some low frets in the middle of this neck. How about that? So it's telling me something. It's cutting here, 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 and here, not there, and here. So it sort of suggests, oh, there's a gap in the middle, which is the first pointer to say, well, stop and recheck that you've actually got the same curve on your banana tool as you have on the neck. And this is where the kind of amazing thing is. Actually, according to the 3 points that I just put down, the 3 brass feet, I am mapping this curve correctly. But you know what is true is that the curve that is being made with this tool is ideal. In other words, it's a smooth, linear, sort of not linear, a smooth, continuous curve. However, what we're seeing is that although the 3 points together make, if you take them together as 3, they make that curve between them. But in reality, it's saying that between those 3 points, the neck is doing slightly different things, which you could not see with the human eye, but the banana knoweth. So that plays fine the way it is, and I'm not actually going to do anything else to it, even though I know there's a low spot right there. It plays at the action I've set, which is as low as I'd want to go. I don't want to do anything else to it. I don't want to take it lower, so I don't have to chase. If it was buzzing here in this low spot, I would carry on leveling to bottom out that low spot, but it's not doing that. So I'm not going to bottom it out for no good reason. But it's amazing how the banana tool, forming as it does a more idealized curve than the actual neck is itself, will quickly reveal to you some dynamics or characteristics of the neck, which, as I say, you can't see with the naked eye. So there's a low fret there, and so I've bottomed out these other ones a little bit, but there's definitely a low couple of frets there, and that could be causing some problems because a low fret makes the next one high, relatively speaking. That's okay, and there's another low spot there, which is just making the next one a little bit iffy. Yeah, so it has this ability to tell you what's going on. Now, the other thing that it's shown me recently that I was looking at quite a lot in discussions with people, and so people would say, I'm leveling, trying to remove this fret buzz, and we would sort of look at it together, and they'd say to me, it's not removing the fret buzz, and what's happening? Why isn't it removing fret buzz, and when do I stop, and do I keep on going forever? And when we'd look at it together, it occurred to me over the years that there are kind of two sorts of buzz. There's fret buzz, which, as I call it, which is caused by uneven frets in specific places. And so the thing that you would notice about fret buzz is that it would be limited to one or two specific places that you would start to notice it. It wouldn't be all the way up. And then there's what I call fret slap, which is characterized by the fact that it's a kind of buzz, a low level buzz, but you hear it all the way up. And because it's across almost all the frets, or if not all of them, it doesn't have what I call the characteristic of the fret buzz. Okay, so we freed up that choked off bend up there. I'm just going to do a tiny bit more on this G track. Yeah, so there's the fret buzz, which is characterized by being in a specific place. Now, the thing about fret buzz is that I said it's caused by uneven frets, and most people kind of think of that as high frets and sort of know what to do with high frets. You know, you can visualize it. It's sort of getting in the way of the string. When you fret it up here, there's a higher fret in front, and it's taking or nicking the clearance that you need to play that fretted note, and so the note buzzes against the next fret because it can't move. The thing about fret buzz with uneven frets is that it can be caused as much by high frets as by low frets, as much by low frets as by obviously high frets. So a low fret in a series of frets makes the next one in front of it high relative to it. We're only talking relative level anyway in this whole business. So many times you find that a neck is limited by a low fret that you find in the sequence, and there's one or two on here. Now, you know, I've said before, the question of why they're low is anybody's guess. They could be as much as pressed in a bit harder than the rest of them, for who knows what reason. Maybe tapped a couple of times more with the hammer than the other frets. You don't know, and probably never will. But the point is, it's very common to have low frets, and they make the next one high, and you still have to deal with them as if you're facing high frets in your fretboard. And you have to level down to the bottom of the low fret. You have to bring the neighbouring frets down to its level for it to play without choking or buzzing at a very low action. Now, of course, none of this matters if you're playing at a very high action, because by its nature, high action takes you out of the uneven fret territory. It no longer matters, because the strings are, by definition, always above, or always at a height that there's always some clearance between, or after the fret you're fretting and the next fret, the string and the next fret after the one you're fretting. Anyway, so the point is, raise your action up high and you won't notice uneven or high frets. And that's why a lot of guitars that you may buy or acquire when you buy them second-hand, or even new, would be, look at that, it's cleaned up tiny little bit, but almost entirely cleaned up the fret slap. Yeah, so most guitars you get will be, the action will be set at its lowest before the uneven frets start to make themselves known. And the only way to get lower than that, if you prefer a lower action, is to do this, which is the fret leveling part. And you know, there are a couple of methods to do it which are very effective, and I think a bit over hungry in fret metal. But then there's this method which I think is elegant in the sense that it preserves as much fret metal as possible, which I think is a good pursuit, or a good thing to pursue. But it's also elegant in that when you develop a bit of experience with it, it has a very elegant way of telling you what's going on, so you can kind of read the neck and get it right, which I think is pretty good. These too bendy. Now there's a bit more fret slap in here than I would like on that string only at the moment, so I'm going to level it a little bit more just to kind of create as much room. The clearances are so tiny that with just a little bit more leveling you can make the room that the strings need, and we'll probably find that it feels different anyway when we put tens on it, because they'll be tighter and they won't bend quite so much around the frets as this is. Okay, I'm good with that. Now we've got the fret ends that are a little bit sharp, and what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take these strings off. I've done their service. Right, these are locking tuners. This is a smart move at Michael's, not Michael, sorry, it wasn't you, Michael, it was the seller. The seller of this guitar has done what I always advise doing, is even though he's got locking tuners, he's wound at least halfway. In his case, he's wound a post worth on, I would say about half a post on locking tuners, but he's done that because if you push it straight the way through the first time and lock it, you don't have any, you have no leeway to remove the, undo the locking part and slack the strings off again. You're kind of stuck, because if you do push it all the way through and then later you want to slack it off, do something with the bridge and then tighten up again, you'll be tightening right back on the point you originally crimped, because you have no, you put it right the way through the first time. And if you tighten up on the bit that you've already crimped, it's almost certain to break. Also, I think what this person may have realised is that it's good to have an extra bit to tie around the post, and the reason for that is if you actually rely on these locking tuners to be locking, you tend to make sure they're done up, you tend to crimp them too hard, and you often break strings the first time you load up that particular set of tuners, because you don't know how hard to crimp them to keep them in place. If you don't do them enough, they'll come undone while you're playing and it'll go out of tune. If you do them too hard, as most people do, including myself, you end up breaking them, which is not, it's not a string through, it's me tilting it up to go string through. Yeah, so you end up breaking them quite often. So a way around that is also to wrap a bit round, so that you know that the wrap around is doing a lot of the holding. Now you could say, oh, well, that defeats the whole object of having the locking tuners, and it's true, it does a bit. If you were desperate to get the most locking value out of your locking tuners, then don't do that I just said. But what you will have to do is you'll have to learn the exact point at which your locking tuners start breaking strings, and you have to work around that, and I can't tell you what that is. So that's something you'd have to come to in your own sweet time. Okay, so we've now leveled the frets, and when we restring, I'm going to restring with 10s, so that's going to be a heavier gauge to begin with. The nut now, when you have got this adjustable nut will come out when it feels like it. You can lift it out any time. When you take the strings off, I forgot to mention that, take them off outside inwards, so that you end up with the D and the G last to come off, all right? Because otherwise you may flip the nut off. That's a useful thing. And when you're putting it back on, start with the D and the G first, and then you'll also not flip it to the other side of the ring, which can be annoying. So now I'm going to use marker pen again, and I'm going to mark all the frets one more time. And what I'm doing that for is so I can crown them and be sure that I'm crowning them properly and not reducing the height of the fret anymore. So the whole point is we've just done fret leveling so that the frets are relatively level when we're playing, when the guitar is strung, and we don't want to undo that and create a whole bunch of different new levels which would throw that out. So we have to, just getting rid of this glue dribble. So we have to use this marker pen approach. Right. While this is off as well, I'm going to do the file the fret ends. So the thing is, when you've got sharp fret ends, you have to work out where they are. First thing to do is pull this way, and if they're overhanging or if the fingerboard is shrunk, you'll feel them kind of a little bit there, but not that much. You feel them catch your skin or act like little mini chisels. Now this isn't really like that. It's down in the corners, which is often the case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just literally go in here and take out that little sharp corner bit that's catching my fingers, round it off. Now in a downside, it slightly softens off what was otherwise can be a very neat looking edge of the fret. You know, there's nothing quite like a row of frets that are end beveled to perfection. But the problem with a perfection end bevel is that ultimately it turns the ends of your frets into miniature chisels just waiting to slice your fingers if the fingerboard should so much as dry out a fraction and with retreat from the edge. What you get left with is the chisel blades that your end bevel created, and those chisel blades then find themselves slightly proud of the wood and they find your fingers very quickly. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to first of all round off these little catching corners, and I suppose it's the corner bit where the tang touches the fretboard. So I'm just physically going into each corner, and then what I'll do is I'll flip this round and go down the other side. I've taken the nut off for the time being so it doesn't fall anywhere and get lost. So we come back down here. This file has a safe edge down the back, a soft edge, so I can do this without it rubbing into the wood or cutting into the wood. It's a rounded piece. You do get a sort of little bit of skid, sort of shine marks where the file touches the wood, but you get that on all fingerboard wood. It shines when you press on it, especially if there's finger grease on it from before. It's a sort of ready oiled surface. So I'm just taking those little corners away, and then what I'll do is I'll run down here with some sandpaper as well, just to soften it off, and then the rest of the softening process I'll do as I sand out all of these frets following the recrowning bit. So this is sort of prior to that, and then I'll include the fret ends in the overall sanding regime. So it's a little bit difficult when you get to this end because you're right down in there amongst the bodywork. So okay, so what you can use is, well, I just had some 400. You can use 400. 400. Make it into a little tube or flattish tube. So this is what I would do, is I would run the 400 grit down the edge now manually, and I'm kind of just catching the edge of the metal. Now when you get down this end, you've got to be careful to lift it clear of the paintwork, and if you're not confident in that, then I suggest you put some tape down there. So I'm just rubbing this down the edge. Now it also catches the edge of the fingerboard a little bit, so it rounds that a tiny bit too, but the main reason I'm doing it is for the fret edges more than anything else. Sometimes you want to do it specifically as well for the fingerboard because it can be very sharp edged depending on how it's made and radiused. When you re-radius a fingerboard in a refret process, you have to watch out because you can end up with an incredibly sharp edge without even realizing you've done it. So I tend to always have to soften that off again. Okay, so that's my start of the rounding off process. Now while I'm at it, I've got to now do the recrowning, which uses the Stumac offset diamond file. I'm going to use a medium sized edge or the medium gauge thing, and when I do this I usually have a wire brush standing by to clean out the file just so it doesn't clog up with pen. So the idea is just to take off the shoulders that I've just, or any edges to the fret that I've just put on by making a flat spot on the fret. So you can see I'm going down there quite quickly. You keep going until you've got as thin as possible a black line of marker pen down the middle of the fret. Yeah, okay. And then you stop before you eradicate that black line. And if you do, then it tells you you've rounded off the frets, but by the fact that you haven't touched the black marker on the top, it shows you that you haven't lowered the action at all. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting about the width of that nut slot. The only guitars I've had difficulties with that in the past have been things like the Sun Mustangs and the Encores that they made in India in the late 80s, early 90s, probably just early 90s. And they were characterized by one of the defining features with the deeper front to back, deeper nuts they were fitted with, and it made replacing the nut actually quite a pain because it came with not a great plastic type nut, and frankly you must always wanted to replace it, and to be honest, the only way you could do it was to make one out of bone, custom made one. The problem with that is I didn't really more and more want to use tusk because it's a better material. Yeah, there's not a really simple way around solving that problem. It'd be great if you could, well, you could do a filler type stuff and, you know, put something in there, or you can actually shim front to back as well, but it doesn't feel great doing that. You want a snug fit, but again, it's an odd technology. It's not ideal. Okay, so now we've leveled the frets, we've sanded the edges, we've filed the edges, and now it's time to polish them out. To do that, I'm going to mask off the whole fingerboard with tape, and then I'm going to go into a sanding process which involves loads of different grades of sandpaper, blah blah blah, through micro meshes, and ends up with going over with some autosol and a Dremel thing. And to be honest, I'm going to do that off camera because it's noisy and I do it off camera most of the time. It's pretty straightforward. I will get some naphtha and stuff on there to lift up any grease that's on there, and I'll clean out this once I've done the leveling and the polishing. I'll clean this out with naphtha as well, and then we'll have a fresh fingerboard to start Michael's. Thank you. Oh yeah, this is a problem. Fresh fingerboard to start out Michael's ownership of this guitar. We've got down here, there are a couple of body blemishes, you know. When I look at it here, there's a blob there and there's a blob there. It's almost as if there was a different bridge once, but it wouldn't be. It would be about that large. Don't know what it is. Yeah, so what's we got here is we've got a spinning thingy. Now, I think it could just be solved by, yeah, doing it up. That's good. That's much better. I was hoping that it wouldn't be worn out. It's not an old guitar, so it shouldn't be. Right, so I'll mask this off. It's about an hour worth of time with the masking, the sanding and the polishing. So I will zone out, listen to some radio, and I will come back when that's done. I'll clean the guitar body, we'll put new strings on, we'll set the new strings up, stretch everything out, test and set the action, and then do the intonation as well, make sure that's all good. All right, so I shall see you in a minute. I'm struggling to get the temperature up in this room. Okay, I don't know how long the battery will last on this thing, but let's get going. Right, polishing frets, recrowning, polishing, sanding out and polishing with the Dremel done. Oops, let's get that on the actual fretboard, shall we? So now just putting some oil onto the board, darken it a bit, and now we'll get our D'Addario 10s and restring, and then stretch out, and then intonate for those 10s, and we'll check the action again, and particularly the neck relief, because if you're stepping up a gauge of strings, it will put more load onto the neck, and you may need to add or dial a bit more force into the truss rod to counter the bending of the neck caused by the strings. Now I think this, because we were practically flat to begin with, I think this, if it does any change at all, it will be kind of what we want, which is to put a tiny bit of relief into the neck. I don't think we'll need any adjustment because it was practically very nearly flat beforehand, but we shall see. Okay, so I'm going to go first of all with, it's quite difficult, this will be difficult to get these strings through. You have to bend the strings first of all to get them up through. And I'm going to go with the D and the G first to pin down the adjustable nut, which is loose, if you remember. The top part, it's only a top part. The nut is loose, so you want to pin that down first. So remember which is which. I'm going to go in the G first, and I'm going to do a kind of similar thing to the previous owner of this. Pull it tight, and I'm going to come, oh, my nut has moved already. I'm going to come back about a fingernail's worth and lock that off. And I'm going to resist over tightening it because I don't want to get into this breaking it by crimping it thin. So put a fair tightener on it and then tightened it up, and that's holding the nut in place now. I'm going to do, oh yeah, before I put the strings on I should have got all the, whatchamacallit, tuner holes in the same place. That would just make things a little bit easier. There we go. So now we're on the D and through here. Funny enough, I bought some, or I put some new strings on my Taylor Baby tonight, earlier on. And as I took them out of the packet, they're Martin strings. Took them out of the packet, and I have to say, I was not convinced they were Mexican-made Martin strings. Not good. It seems, I have a horrible feeling that just about everything's counterfeit these days. Even, you know, Claire said to me, you know, why would anyone fake a set of Martin acoustic guitar strings, you know, if they're £5 or something a pack? And I guess the reason is that if it costs the Chinese manufacturer 20p to make a set of strings, then £4.80 of profit or whatever is not a bad deal to, or not a bad incentive to be faking them. So in a way, it's not, it doesn't actually always add up that it has to be the very expensive things that are faked. It's probably got more to do with the basic basic cheapness in the first place of the item we're talking about. You know, so I mean, we kind of know, we don't sort of mind if Martin makes a set of strings, all right, they might be paying Mexican rates and whatever, and it will be cheaper than American rates, and you know, we know they're making profit, and we figure they've got some sort of margin worked out that's, you know, not out of this world. But we don't know. We for example, it could cost Martin, or the company that makes the Martin strings in Mexico could cost them 50p a set of strings, and we end up buying them for £5 or £6, and somebody's clearly making you know, quite a bit on the whole thing when you're taking distribution, shipping and all that sort of stuff. But the Chinese can get in on it without any worry about copyright or trademarking and stuff, then they will, because they don't have any particular concern for international agreements on such things by the sounds of it. I imagine they would, their trade minister would deny that, but I think we all know that you're only a mouse click away from your Rickenbacker copy, if you want one, or your Chender or your Chibson. So that comes from China, and somehow it isn't get shut down by the Chinese government, so I presume that's somehow agreed or allowed. Anyway, but yes, so to my surprise, I had a feeling that these might have been fake Martin strings. You know, they were, like I say, £5 or £5.50, something like that. So you wouldn't even imagine there would be a reason to fake them. Except any big brand has its own value in, you know, that's built up over the years, and if you can fake that, you can shortcut all of the hard work of building that brand and its research and development and all the things that go into making the product that they make. If you fake it, you shortcut all of that and you sell your thing in the competitive market as if you were them, and that's why passing off is so lucrative. At any level, not just Lamborghinis or Rolexes, or I don't think anyone's ever made a fake Lamborghini, but you know what I mean. Okay, so now, just having put the strings on, first thing I'm going to do is just give them a bit of a pull to bed them in before we get into the other stretching techniques. So sort of a simple one that will catch out anything that's caught on any edge of something, preventing the ball end from seating where it should. You'll kind of pick it up by doing this. And then we go for a note. This has been sanded, you know. There's a patch of poly missing off the end here, but it's not like any extra anything's been added, so it sort of doesn't make sense. Okay, so I put 10s on this, and the first thing that seems to have happened is the action has gone up, which is quite interesting. It has pulled a bit of relief in where there was hardly any before. What I also notice is the action is too high here now. Maybe it was before and I just didn't look too carefully, but let's undo that a little bit. Okay, we'll take that down. And then we can also check the action at the end here, which shouldn't have moved, but you never know. Grub screws do funny things while you're moving the guitar, polishing things out. So we do need to come down a little bit on that. Let's get the right one. We'll go back to where I want it. It's definitely moved. That's amazing. Just through moving or even sanding with the polishing with the thing, it's caused these screws to move. How weird. Let's tweak it. Funny thing about these saddles is they're standing up pretty tall, and they're having to point downwards to get to the action I want. In fact, I think there comes a point where almost they can't go any further down. Maybe they can. Okay, 1.5. That's what we want. Oops. So just going to get these tweaked to all the right height. It's funny that how much that's moved in just handling the guitar. That's really weird. Okay. Too low, too low. So look. Okay. See that clicked. A couple of bends. Okay, so before I do more stretching, Nice. Right, so to get rid of the final bits of slack, which will be the only other thing now that will upset the tuning, you want to get in there and hand stretch, thumb and forefinger stretch the strings quite thoroughly. This slack that stays in these strings will stay in there, can stay in there for years at a time and come out every time you bend a string. What you think isn't there will come out and surprise you by putting the guitar very slightly out of tune. That's 1/2 of your, in my experience, of your tuning stability. And people can think, stretch the strings out, and that detuning there will keep on coming out. And we just have to keep on taking it out manually until there's no more detuning. And if we do that, then it will stay and play in tune. And I just had some great feedback on the Real Love Guitars Facebook page from James concerning his red Epiphone 339. I put an adjustable tusk nut on it and set it up, and also did this extreme stretching out, and he's just astonished at how much in tune it is. See how much is still stretching out of there. It's ridiculous, and that will all be coming out while you play if you don't stretch it out now. So we're just doing that, and you could do this 5 or 6 times even until it stops detuning, or you could do this 3 or 4 times and then do a load of bends as well until it stops detuning. Whatever it takes to stop it detuning is the only point at which you will get a guitar that stays in tune when you play it. And the thing about a guitar that stays in tune when you play it ends up being the only one you really want to go to. So we're pretty much there with the playing strings. A little bit more stretching of these bass strings, and I think we'll be there now. Yep. Okay, good. Next thing to do, I'm going to check the intonation, and then it'll be it for tonight, because it's later than you think, I think. So all in all, this setup takes, when all goes well like this one, takes about just 3 hours, or just perhaps a little under if it really goes smoothly. And this one has been no problem. There's nothing surprising about this so far. It's always, if this was a Les Paul, by the way, I wouldn't be saying that at this stage, because any minute now, if it was a Les Paul, I could very easily discover that the thing won't intonate and I have to take the bridge apart. But thankfully, that's not the case with this type of bridge. I'd say that's a fraction too short. That's pretty much what my eyes tell me. So that's not so bad either. Okay. There's that one. So this one needs to come back a small amount. Too short. Bring it back. That's where it wants to be. Okay, just going to check the action spread again with the last fret, just to be sure, and then we are pretty much done. Good, good, good. What I might just do as a last final thing, I might just, like on a lot of guitars that I get through, there's little bits of watermarks from, I don't know, where things have sat on pegs and maybe get stained or something along the way, and so I'm just going to put a little bit of polish on there for a last thing before I finish. But let's just double check this. We've got, okay, that's low, that's one and a bit fraction. Let's just do a tiny bit more. Yeah, 1.5, 1.4. Yeah, good. Lovely. Right, last little bit then. While we're here, let's use a bit of this. So that's a cleaning one, that's the wiping one. Right, so yeah, I'm just going to put a tiny bit of this stuff. It's got a few little hairline hairs. I think here. There's a tiny bit of this stuff. Oop. And then just work it in. There's a great scratch remover stuff, but it takes those little watermark type swirls off that as much as possible anyway, without completely rebuffing the whole thing, which I'm not going to do. But you can see it's like a guitar polishing paste. That's what it is. I used to use the Intonation stuff by whatever, Intonation, which I think came from the States and was anyway very expensive. This isn't much cheaper, but it does pretty much exactly the same. Clever people in the world of finishings and stuff would probably know, you know, a sort of industrial version of this, and you know, find a way of buying a litre of it for the price that I've paid for a tiny little white bottle of this stuff. But I don't know what it is, and in the meantime, a little white bottle of the stuff kind of lasts well enough, if I'm honest. So last little bit of polish up around the edge here on the side, and sometimes the back is pretty good anyway. Sometimes the back has a fair bit of buckle, you know, belt buckly stuff, which sort of isn't worth trying to polish out because you can't. But the front, as a, you know, this thing that doesn't normally get much scratching, can make quite a sort of sparkly difference quick once over like this. Time and investment on return on investment, if you get what I mean. Okay, there is Michael's Squier Mustang done, ready to go. Could go back tomorrow actually if he's up in the invoice receiving mode, but I don't blame him if he's not. It's going to be past 9 o'clock. But that's that. I'm going to leave the Matt Heafy Epiphone here to discover whether or not it's going to stay or go. But anyway, another reloved guitar is done. See you again someday soon, hopefully when it gets warmer.